Hello, everyone. Welcome to our FNC. I'll just give a short introduction of FNC and Mansi today here. So we are here with Mansi with the topic of waterfront we wish to misunderstand. Um, and basically, Friday night conversations are hosted here at Compartment Esco. We are a design collaborative of 8 architects, and we have decided to have these conversations, realizing the strong gaps between the world of academics and practice. It has been great so far since we've been able to rope in different practitioners and researchers from different places to talk about the topics that we align with and we feel require a sort of collective analysis. So far we have had 3 Friday night conversations with the continuing thread and theme of discussions around water. Our first Friday night conversations, in our first Friday night conversations, we discussed the design toolkits for approaching on how to approach water, along with Eshani and Hardi. Following that, we discussed ownerships of water between the urban and rural areas with Prakriti Shukla. And our last discussion was with S. Vishwanath, also known as Zen Rain Man. And along with him, we began to look at the ways architects can, start thinking about conserving and being sensitive to water, specifically conserving groundwater. So following this theme of water, we've also recently come up with a brief and we're inviting entries for Unmute, which is a publication, again, a self-publication under Compartment Esco, where we compile different pieces in terms of writing or illustrations, photo stories, etc., into a short publication, which is then put out. So the theme this time is water, and I hope many of you can have a look at the brief and you would be interested to contribute. So today we've got Mansi Balbhargava, and she's going to be discussing waterfronts and how we should probably approach this idea of waterfronts and start beginning to understand it. Mansi is a transdisciplinary learner of the built environment from the sustainability and livability perspective in architecture, design, development, planning, management, and governance. Her 25 years of entrepreneurship, research, and education focus on large-scale developments with inclination towards ecological restorations. She has deep concerns in water management in India and understands water management is a societal in society requires management. Therefore, she is now inclined towards social engineering and collective actions. She aspires to dedicate herself to water conservation and management in India through research, writing, public speaking. She's also on a mission to inculcate ecological research aptitude and altitude, along with the youth to charter their life goals. As she believes that research as a systematic investigation may lay the foundation of any collective decision and action in the society. She also believes that science with conscience is crucial to build a sustainable and livable society. Mansi has done her master's in CEPT University, MPhil from University of Cambridge, and PhD from the Erasmus University Rotterdam on the same subject. So we are extremely excited to have Mansi today, especially since she has such a deep understanding in this topic related to water. And we've had some very interesting and instigating discussions with her previously following this FNC. And we're hoping to make this particular conversation more engaging with the audience and all of you. So now I'll hand it over to Mansi. Mansi, you can share your screen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Vedanti, and thank you, entire Compartment S4 team. And it is really nice to see a consortium being made of youngsters, which was also my dream when I was as young as you. So congratulations on that. And it is also good to know that you have already discussed with few people about water. So I won't have to do a lot of, moving and shaking with you guys, but that has been my main job. And particularly that has been somehow a task since the lockdown has come. A silver lining here is that after lockdown, people have reached out to talk water more than ever. So today I complete my 60 talks since last March, and I have been counting, and I hope it goes on. And out of the 60 talks, 50 have been only on water, others 10 are only on other subjects. So I'm not a water expert. I would like to put that disclaimer. And with that disclaimer, I'm going to share my screen. And I really thank all of you to take out time in this digital exhaustion period nowadays. Today itself, I have my 7th hour now going to be on the digital life since morning. So bear with me if I feel, if my words go wrong, if I am really stumbling, think that I'm digitally exhausted. But I'll try to convey what I wish to. Please confirm when you see the screen. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Okay, perfect.
Just put it on slide. So.
Yes, I'm going to do that. Yeah. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I put up a topic which looks a bit weird, kind of, a waterfront that we wish to misunderstand. And I'm going to tell you why I'm saying that we wish to misunderstand. And I did some little exercise with my own acquaintance, my researchers and my students. But importantly, as I mentioned, that I'm not a water expert. I'm still trying to understand, 25 years into it. And honestly speaking, I cannot stand up and say that I know about water. So I did a small exercise. I sent this kind of a format to my students, asking them to fill it up, for this session today. So we are going to hear a few students to see what do they understand by water and waterfront. I thought it's a good exercise to get engaged with my own people whom I'm either supervising, researching, or teaching or something. So we are going to hear a few people. Please confirm when you hear. Are you hearing the sound?
No, Mansi, you can't hear the sound. Okay.
Okay, I have to make the sound. I have to share sound. Yeah. Okay, please confirm.
Since childhood, I do believe that जल ही जीवन है. जल के बिना जीवन की कल्पना मुश्किल है. Water bodies are like veins to earth. If we disturb, harm it, then obviously we have to face the circumstances. Nowadays, we are polluting the water bodies too much, and we facing the problem that is water that leads to water crisis, drought, and many more. If we do not take any step, then must see our future will be in great danger, and the coming days will be very harsh. Thank you.
So there is one more. You're going
Hello
to
everyone. நீரின்றி அமையாத உலகு, which means without water, earth won't be there. Water is most essential thing which is needed for the survival of all living organisms. That's why people started settlements around waterfront for their survival, as well as civilizations also starts out there. Waterfronts are most important for the development of the cities as well as their economy also. Now, those settlements are still there, but they are purchasing water from some other sources. This is because due to they polluted the water bodies so much. We have to preserve water bodies. Then only we can create a self-sustained city. Thank you.
So one more, I guess. Yes, one more.
I think water is one of the most essential substances in the planet. You can live without food 2 or 3 days, but without water, you cannot live. I feel like water solves all problems. Want to lose weight? Drink water. Want Clear face, drink water. No water, no blue, no life, no green. So please save water.
Okay, so what we see here is the students, these are basically students, I'm going to have more of them, that people have a notion about water, which is very clear. But when we talk about waterfront, it becomes a very tricky thing, you know. So before we talk about waterfront, we need to understand waterscape as such, you know, because waterfront is a very, very limited word, which is used by kind of an intervention, which is very, you know, technical engineering. And it has a specific notion of public realm. Whereas our landscape is completely filled of water. So if I have to talk about waterfront as a waterfront word, every water body has a front. Whether we design it as designers or not, they cater to different functions and they have different fronts, whether we have intervened or not. It can be natural, it can be man-made. I'm going to focus only on rivers and lakes, but there are other kinds of water bodies as well in the country. So I'm just putting a very simple figure in front of you as 9% of area underwater. But interestingly, we have more than 400 rivers, which means multiplied by kilometers on both sides, it is riverfront. It's a different matter whether they go through the city, whether they go through the village, whether you have designed or not designed. So this is something which we need to first understand, that waterfront is not a copyright of cities and designers. Every water edge is a waterfront. So that is the first myth busting we need to do, misunderstanding we need to get over. Then if I talk about lakes and wetlands, which also includes mangroves, swamps, and so on and so forth, the number is unclear in the country. But importantly, it is innumerable to my understanding. I think nearly more than 50 lakh water bodies are there, smaller water bodies. But if I take a piece of one city out of this, which is my city at this moment, and also FNC city, which is Ahmedabad, we have already identified more than 122 lakes in the recent time. And when I was of their age, of the FNC people's age, when I did my undergraduate and from Bhopal and graduation from CEPT, Ahmedabad had more than 600 water bodies in the city itself. So we can see already in 20 years, we have this landscape being already altered. But when we get into the waterscape, we see different kind of waterscapes. All of them have fronts. It's just that what we call as fronts. So I'm just trying to make a note to you that we need to understand waterfront has a vast meaning than what we understand as waterfront per se. Although I am going to focus on that meaning which you perceive as waterfront, which is the designed waterfront, but it was important for me to bring to you that it is not our, copyright. So design waterfronts on water bodies with or without water. So this is an important line for me. I want to ask any of the audience, what are the three things you see here? Anybody from the people who are attending it, even from the FNC group. Can you tell me three keywords from here? Anyone would like to take a dig? I want to make it interactive. Huh? I'm very good in monologue, but I really prefer interactive. Yes.
I can see the boats, I can see the ghats and the water.
You can see the ghats, the boats, and the water. You are good. Do you see the words which are written there? I'm looking for three keywords.
Design waterfront on water bodies.
It becomes four. It becomes four keywords. I'm looking for three keywords.
Waterfront, water bodies and water.
Very good. Who is this?
Megha.
Megha. But I see design on and without or with. Water is a constant here, no? Yes, so there are 6 keywords actually, which makes it very interesting. So when we talk about waterfronts, and I will bring, because most of the people who are attending here are more from the design and architecture and urban design and planning background. When we design waterfronts, and you can recall your own studio days, many of the time you are not even filling the water blue. You're not even deciding the edge of it. So this is where it becomes very important to know that these are 3 different entities: the water bodies, the waterfront. So they are not same. They are interrelated, but they are not same. So we design the waterfront, which is a piece of land on the water bodies. So sometimes we take up land from the water bodies, which means that we are tampering with the hydrology or with the water itself, which designers often pretend in their profession or in their part of execution of the project. So I want to bring an example from another of my student. What does she thinks about it? Okay, I have to play the video. Yes. Sorry, this is bit because of the panel. I can't. Okay. Do you hear her?
Hello all, I'm Riddhi and I'm an architect. For me, waterfront was defined as ghats, which has social and which was only for social and religious purpose. So as a kid, I believed it that waterfront was a ghat. But suddenly one day, I got to know about intervention of Sabarmati riverfront in Ahmedabad, and I feel that intervention of urban water front in general is a very smart idea, as it not only thrives the economic sector, but also it becomes a landmark of the city and hence gives value to the city. But the development of urban waterfronts shouldn't just be focused on the economic and the revenue, but instead on the water as a resource and the inhabitants in and around it. I feel that urban waterfront should be more organic in design and thought as well. It shouldn't just focus majorly on economy. It should be more on ecology, sensitivity towards water, and human interaction with the nature. Thank you.
So as you see, Riddhi actually did her thesis some years ago, and she talked about underwater. So I reached out to her to know what is her understanding of water. So here is one other of my acquaintances. So I just gathered their views about it. Manisha does not have a sound here, but she does write, and I'm going to just read her last paragraph on waterfronts. Waterfronts in India mostly just mimic the Sabarmati concrete project. She's from, by the way, Jaipur. It is high time we stop putting our natural resources, biodiversity, and ecology in cages and view them from a distance. And mind you, I am not really parroting them to say these things. Huh? This was just an independent exercise which I requested them to do for this lecture particularly. So here I bring some models of waterfront which have come across in the country. And these are all Gujarat models. And we are in Gujarat. And I'm sure many of the people who have joined today are not from Gujarat, but it is good to talk about it. So on the right top, which is our leading lake model in the country, that is Kankaria, and the Vastrapur was the first in Ahmedabad before Kankaria was done in the new time. Then we have Baroda, Sursagar, and Gopi Talab from Surat. There is something which is a panacea here. There's something, a pattern which you can figure out from these water bodies, new gen development or new age development, which is a waterfront, by the way. Huh? So lake is just an example here. I'm also going to come to the river, as I mentioned. But you can realize the modus operandi in these kind of developments, and which is where I have a concern in the way we look at development. And that's where I'm making some notes and trying to understand what is our understanding as a society for it. So here is my playground. I live not far from here. If you see my mouse, I'm just here near Thaltej Lakes. And I have grew with this place for last 25 years. When I came to Ahmedabad, this place had 4 lakes. Now it is 2 lakes, and it is going to turn into 1 lake, because the one which I have put red is going to be a metro station now. So in 25 years, I see 4 lakes reducing to 1 lake, and I'm sure 1 lake is already going to be argued upon. Why not have a lakefront development like Vastrapur, like Kankaria, like Gopi Talab, like Sursagar, as I showed you the previous slide. And it is rightfully so, because our notion of waterfront is now a kind of a developed waterfront, which is a public realm. And it's right. As far as people are concerned, it is right. As far as development is concerned, it is right. As far as economy is concerned, the only question it comes there, is it right for the water? Is it right for the ecology itself? Because there is more than water, which is an ecosystem. So what happens behind this beautification is something which I would like to bring to your notice, and which is where I have serious concerns when I look at water bodies and the notion of development itself. Because when we talk about these developments, and you can look into any of the policy documents, there will be talking about riverfront development, lakefront development. So this water body is given a new identity, which is the front. And mind you, the land-water interface, which is the edge of the water, which is the so-called front of the water, is the most vulnerable part of water body. And it is the most deciding part also for the water body, not only for the people, as a good lake or bad lake, or a good river or bad river. So as citizens, we are actually judging a water body by the waterfront, which is the most ironic part. So what lies behind in the waterfront is this development. This is from Sursagar, by the way, Baroda. 2 years ago, I conducted a lake walk with the MSU students, and it is before that. But what I'm trying to show you is the piece of land which you see exposed. And mind you, that was topsoil, which takes thousands of years to get built. So soil is also something which is the least talked component in water, and by designers and architects in the country, by the way. So the topsoil lost, filled with some kind of excavation from somewhere, get it filled here with concrete. But what we don't see is often when we are drawing on the drawing boards in our studios with all beautiful things around us, is if you see my mouse, if somebody can give me a go that you can see my mouse.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So all this excavation and filling up, you see, is part of the lake. So this is we call it water grabbing, or that's the pessimistic side of it. The optimistic side of it is land reclamation. This is where our desire to have more land, our desire to build in front of water, our desire to have a beautiful face to the water, we often forget about the water body itself. So this is what it looks, and this is how the process goes. You see, after the topsoil is lost, which took around 10,000 to 15,000 years to build, you put up, you pour concrete, you make beautiful design to get approved, and then you uproot hundreds and hundreds of beautiful trees and 100-year-old trees. As you see, this is by the way, bud tree, which is no more, which was there when I took the walk. So this whole focus on land off the water leads to the loss of wetlands. So I want to give you here some statistics of the country. Since independence, India has lost half of its wetlands. So when I'm talking about wetlands, I'm talking about lakes, rivers, wetlands, swamps, or peats, you can name it all. We've lost half of them. The remaining half are in half of the size. So those lost fully have been transformed into development. those remaining half in size have been transformed into so-called designed development, where we come into picture as, you know, intelligent people doing something to the city to beautify. So I'm actually going to put this satire or sarcasm all the time, because I have been pained the way we have looked at these kind of projects, and they cost multiple crores of rupees. And at the end of the day, if they don't do good to my nature, I have serious questions for it. So this is the process which goes on to beautify a lake. And after that, the entire city is appreciating it. And this is where we get kind of a, you know, acknowledgement that this is what the society wants, because there is more appreciation after this process than there was appreciation before, because there was a wilderness in the water was dirty, and so on and so forth. So what went in? The development happened in between. But what happened to this development was, when the development was happening, there was no concern by the designer where the water is going to come from. And I faced this question from many of the designers and policymakers. After the waterfront is done, they ask how to get the water there. So water is not an independent entity. By the way, the entire earth mass is water, wet, land. It's only that some places there is more collection of water. In some places it is underground water. In some places the water is not visible when it is underground, which is the groundwater. Otherwise, water is everywhere in every piece of soil and in our body itself. But the concern when you do this kind of lake development, and I'm sure many of you can recall 2 years ago, the flood in Baroda. All the flood and droughts in the urban areas are the result of the way we have done water developments or waterfront developments without understanding the relationship of every water body in the city. Rather, in the entire country, they are one family. You have to trace it. So I give another example here, which was part of my PhD study, and later I also went on to do a little bit of advisory there. So this is Hyderabad, Hussain Sagar. And I know one of the participants had a request to talk about Hyderabad, so I put it here. So the distress which happened in Hyderabad a few months ago, 6 months ago, the flood. I'm just showing example of Hussain Sagar, but the flood was at other place, Fox Sagar and other places. The distress has a strong relationship with the size of the water body, with the loss of the drains, with the blocking of the drains, and the way the waterfront has been dealt. The moment we do waterfront, we have to ensure that we are actually respecting the inlets and outlets of water bodies, but often they are neglected because they are the most dirty part, and that is where we want to screen it off, you know. It's like putting up, making a poor person wear a Gucci dress or Armani dress. It's something like that, you know. So this is exactly what we do to waterfronts when we do not respect the inlet and outlet channels. So every water body will be connected to many streams or few streams, so which we need to acknowledge. So I'm already telling what do's and don'ts. I will not have a separate slides for them. I'm giving another example. I'm going to touch upon the design component of how we are designing and how we used to design in the recent past and in the very old past also. So this is an example from Anna Sagar, which I had the privilege to work with a Japanese fellowship. And I looked through the chronology of development of Anna Sagar, and it is very interesting to see how it is it was built. So most of the lakes and rivers, small channels, have been taken care since antiquity. So Anna Sagar is not different. So there was a design component always, but the design component was to cater to the hydrology. After the hydrology was taken care of, which required engineering, the aesthetic or the decoration or the design, which we can call as, used to come on top of it. It was not the leading part. And this whole lack of, you know, style of architecture, whether you call it Rajputana style, whether you call it this style, that style, was very secondary depending on the location these water bodies were. So when you go to Anasagar, Baradari, you see beautiful structure which has, which has very architectural language of three reigns, right from the Mughals to Hindu ruler to the British rulers. So just to give you the design ideas, of time, how time also grew with the water edges. Now, when we see the new Anasagar edge development, we see some kind of model, which is again coming from the Gujarat model itself. So how to do it? So we are also losing the local essence of design, the way we are doing the panacea approach of waterfront developments. Another important aspect to look at here as an example, which I'm trying to show, is whenever we are doing this reclamation by cutting trees, and Anasagar itself is going through new development where they want to make a fruit orchard. For making that fruit orchard, they are cutting trees which are 75 years old and 50 years old and 100 years old. I really don't know what kind of intelligence these designers and decision makers show by doing that. So the point I'm trying to make here is we destroy the ecology first to show ecology. And this is the classic mimic we do often in our waterfronts when we try to show, these statues lying here and there. And it was really classic to see a peacock and all kinds of animals are there in that waterfront. So when you cut down trees and then you say we have to respect nature, I think there is some kind of double standard and we need to go past that. So bringing another example from my PhD, but then later on I went on to do work with the government to do the policy advisory. Also, this was a case, this is Mansagar, Jaipur. This was a case in Supreme Court and High Court. I also had the privilege to write some expert comments on the judgments and all. So these are also projects, by the way. If you don't design as architects, we call these also projects. So the development of Mansagar also shows a very classic panacea problem. We have these waterfronts where we all want chowpatty. That's one part of it, either chowpatty or ghat. Or we have only few other options. What Ahmedabad Gujarat model or Sabarmati model brought was actually a new form of waterfront, which is why we have an alternate form. I'm not talking about good or bad, but at least there was an alternative area. So in the Mansagar also, if we see in the new development component, a 400-acre lake gets reduced by 100 acres to save the 300 acres of lake. This is, as I mentioned, every waterfront development has led to reduction in the water body area, which is a big problem. And as I mentioned, water grabbing. So these are all lakes example, but rivers are not different, by the way. I'm not a river expert. I study lakes, and that's why I showed few examples of lake. And then I bring you Sabarmati example, why it is the same modus operandi where we used to exercise this scheme of land reclamation from water body at a smaller scale. Eventually, because of power, because of ability to do, because of being in a good economic condition, we dared to upscale our same approach or modus operandi to deal with waterfronts. So Sabarmati River became Sabarmati Lake in these few years of waterfront development. The process is same. Losing the topsoil, losing the ecology, losing the trees, losing the vulnerable people, but having a beautiful waterfront, beautiful in the eyes of those who think it is beautiful, because Sabarmati is for people of Ahmedabad. But then who are those people for whom this waterfront is a completely different question. We can talk about it some other time, but the point I'm trying to make here in this slide here, and I'm taking one point with each example every time. Here, the identity of the river itself has been sabotaged by 20 kilometers of some development. Sabarmati River, a 400 kilometers river, now suddenly gets a image or identity of only 20 kilometers, which is going to be now another 5 kilometers. Just last week it got approved. So the model is going to be extended to another 5 kilometers. So my concern is again here, can 20 kilometers be more powerful than 380 kilometers of the river? Can we not talk about those 380 kilometers? They are either under distress or in natural form. Are they not important? Why designers are not talking about it? Why are we so obsessed with something which man is going to build on water is the design and not other parts are design? So my concern with Sabarmati riverfront is not the riverfront per se, but the river is now a lake, one part, and the river is actually the front, which is of 20 kilometers, is taking away the identity of 400 kilometers. And which is a concern, because when I'm talking about a concern, because all these projects are political ecology examples, the money, the decisions, the process, the management will all be focused accordingly. So are we giving enough attention? Is the water body itself being treated fairly by us as designers and decision makers? This is where the concern lies. I'm bringing why we have gone into that situation. So I'm bringing few points, can't do all of it in a short time. So our notion of nature, development and conservation, and even humans, is something which is actually leading the way we are looking at waterfronts. And I will say that this whole, obsession to put society into a social order in a manicured way, in a mechanical way, in a more machismo way of everything has to be this way or that way, the way decision makers think people should be this way, that way. It's beyond the way people should be following law, but then that gets implemented in the design. So our idea of nature itself is changing, and I'm giving two examples from the same case as lakes. The top one is from Hussain Sagar, the bottom one is from Ahmedabad. And trust me, the ecological value of all the three, which you, maybe one you like, of course, which has a very beautiful view, but the two you may not like because the view is not beautiful as per your definition of beauty. Even the two has higher ecological value than the fourth one, which is a developed waterfront. This is where designers need to learn that what are we offering in terms of ecology when we are doing development. So we, instead of doing this ecological order, which has more frugality, or it is more flexible, if we are on the track to put everything in order, there is a serious problem, and that's my concern. So I play another of my students' work here.
Hello, my name is Parth, and the research looked at the case of Sabarmati River. I began with asking what is a river, because it has been understood as lifeline of human civilization, an ecosystem, and subject of arts and engineering, but above all, a natural existence. So the research looked at how do we define river as a natural body, what components we use to derive river, and how the edge as a component sort of contributes to it. I investigated this act of reinforcing an edge through which we separate land and water in context of Sabarmati. And the key learnings from the research derived that the works on Sabarmati and the other examples of rivers indicate that when one perceives edge to water, that perception of an edge then becomes the line along which we calibrate history, memory, inhabitants, exploitation. Because without edge, there is no history. So whenever we talk about river, it is that we actually talk about how the edge functions and appears in that moment of time. It is a human construct that is often misunderstood as a natural flow of water. For me, riverfronts and waterfronts are something which shows the material dominancy of land over water. The separation of land and water does not exist in nature. It is the first act of colonizing this wet lands. Is this not good enough that all we do as designers is to move from one problem to the another? in a paradigm that takes this separation for granted.
Okay, so as you see, people do have some kind of views of what's going on. So that brings an interval, but my slides are there, but because I wanted to put up this part and then come to case studies, which is also a part of request which you have made. So hope you get out of there. So that was first part of it. And thank you for getting in here. What I'm going to show you now with some of the places where I have lived around the world. But before that, I would like designers to take note of when they do waterfronts. You know, do we bother about water? Where is it going to come from? Where is it going to go from here? Ironically, no. You go to any office who are dealing with waterfronts and water bodies, please ensure that you hire a hydrologist, a limnologist, an ichthyologist, an ornithologist. I can go on and on. A biologist, a geologist. Come back to me and tell how many of those are hired for these kind of projects. If not, then we are not concerned about water. We are concerned about concrete, how to put the concrete there on that water body or on that piece of land. So this is where we have to first change our approach. First, understand the water. How to get the water here is a bigger problem than what to do on the water body. Nowadays in the country, when we have more than 20 cities going dry, all the cities have floods every year, then all the people who are, more than 50% people who are actually having no access to safe drinking water. So if we don't think about that kind of issues and we keep on, pampering our design abilities to make something only look beautiful, I think we have to be a little bit more sensible. So I bring the distresses which we bring in without even acknowledging and without even held accountable for it. Do we bother about flood, drought, commodification of water, access to water for all, climate change when we are designing waterfronts? If not, we have to do it. Because I can prove you, not in this course, probably this session probably, but the way we deal with water bodies in our cities is the key source of problem of all these which I am mentioning. Are designers held accountable for them? No. Every time there is a flood, drought, or access to water problem, we go and actually blame our politicians. Politicians are not designing. Decision makers are not designing. They are hiring designers with hefty money as fees to design what is the most rightful for the citizens. They trust on us. They rely on our technical knowledge. So I want to ask you, are you taught water to understand the technical knowledge to design waterfronts? I am not taught, I am learning. But are you those who are designing water bodies?
Hello,
I bring you
I am
example here.
Vaishnavi and my thesis is on the impacts of anthropogenic activities on urban lakes. During the course of my thesis and during my other learning periods, one thing that I learned about water is that it is the reason why we exist. Irrespective of whether it is our household or at a community level, water as an element has always played a significant role in shaping our lifestyle and cultures. Historically, waterfronts were spaces where people connected with the water body and also built a relationship with the community that made them stronger with them as a community. Currently, these spaces are more of concretized spaces on the edges and are restricted for use, where we cannot access them freely whenever we want to. Waterfronts these days have become more of a symbol of power in the name of development, either by a political entity or a leader of any sorts, similar to what we saw during the world wars that had happened.
Okay, so if we want to solve problem, if we want to have water, there are techniques, technicians available. We don't have any problem with it. It is all there. The problem is that we are still focused on anthropocentric. We are still focused on development centric without realizing that we need ecology even for our future economy. And I think Corona is teaching us. So if we have this chronology of development from a natural water body to reaching out to this development, and if designers are not trying at every stage, when it got polluted, when it got filled up, when it got developed, back to the nature, there is some kind of issue. And our aspiration should be to bring it as close to nature rather than changing the nature of the water body itself. So what do we learn from our past? As I mentioned in the beginning also, in the past, the water structures were beautiful, not because they meant to be beautiful. They were meant to solve the water problem, cater to the water needs. And because they were catering to the water needs and solving the water problems, they were kept and made beautiful so that people respect water. If we change the entire narrative and approach, we have problem. So this is the Kankaria Lake. It was simply a solid waste problem, which led to the entire development. So you can see that there is a politicization of design and and other way around also, by the way. So designers have to make sure that we are really dealing with this kind of issues in a very different way. Of course, nobody may appreciate the top photo as compared to the down photo of the river in both formats. But ecosystem services will be counted, and if you count the ecosystem service, it looks very different. Most of the water bodies in the country are perennial in nature. They must dry, especially I'm talking about this particular example, and all the lakes in Ahmedabad, they must dry and rejuvenate naturally to go further. With the developments which we are doing and ensuring year-round water in the water bodies, we are already changing the nature of the water as well as water bodies. And no wonder that Sabarmati stands as one of the most polluted rivers in the country. So we need to ask as designers, before we replicate the model to there are 14 or 12 riverfronts going around in the country, is there a way in between that we can have a better, cleaner place, but we don't have to go so harsh to the water body itself? So that's your task as a future. So I'm showing some quick examples because I do read the message that we can take discussions. So the quick examples where I have lived around the world is Kralingse Bos, Rotterdam, where the major part of the lake is left as urban forest. An important component of a water body to keep the water clean is a forest ecology. Then the monotony of the water edge is also being dealt with. So you have all kinds of edges, all kinds of fronts. It's not just one type, which is not only going in Ahmedabad city and all lakes and rivers, but now we are copying all over the country. Where is the indigeneity of the place? So we need to tackle that. This is an example from a campus where I lived for my master's, for my PhD for some time. The campus itself has its stream and forest in there. So water is allowed to flow through, underneath the building and all. So they have not closed the water channels inside the campus. Right in front of the forecourt of the administrative building is the wilderness, they call it. It's a real forest. So when you walk in the morning to the campus, you really feel it. Another example, I had the privilege to live here very much in the Sabarmati model is Tempe Town Lake, Arizona, which I also studied as my research in Fulbright. This is a classic same example of Sabarmati, but they have gone a step further. A step further in the sense that the monitoring of water, the maintaining of the water quality, maintaining of the ecosystem of the water. So if we are doing these kind of waterfront developments, we have to go a step further and even talk about the ecosystem at the same length as we talk about the development. Somehow we are short of funds when we have to talk about ecosystem. Somehow we are short of funds when we have to talk about maintenance. Somehow we are short of funds when we have to talk about trees or plantation. To my surprise, they even have a database for every fish flowing in this water body, every plant which is growing in this water body. So if we want to tame water, at least be a little bit more gentle to it. It is a beautiful waterfront. The land price got increased many times after the waterfront was done. This is an example which we are trying to sister concern with Varanasi, which is Kamogawa River in Kyoto. Again, I lived there to walk the river every other day. Beautiful project, but again, completely as per the landscape of the region. And the entire Kyoto city's wastewater gets treated in the river itself. The river is designed in a cascade way in such a way that the wastewater gets treated. So wastewater are actually flowing into the river, and then it is getting treated through a natural ecosystem process of the river. It is also riverfront designed, by the way. So there are ways. And then these little streams are coming to the river. You see this diagram with the little red umbrella. This is a restaurant. Underneath is the water channel which is flowing into the Kamogawa River. So they did not block the channels. And now I want to make you recall, some of you who are living in Ahmedabad, just recall the drainage that we have, a big wetland we have near the RTO office. We are so much wanting to fill it up. We don't want that drainage to go to the water body because we call it drain. We do not call it a natural stream. This is the difference we have to make. Every water body to be saved, we have to save the nalas. So on the left, it is the tributary channel which is feeding the water body of Kamogawa, or the river of Kamogawa. So we are really dealing with them in isolation, all these water bodies. Another example I bring from Shanghai, which was built during the World Expo in 2010. It is also a wastewater treatment wetland, a constructed wetland to do wastewater. If Sabarmati was going to get built, if these local lakes were going to get developed, why can't we integrate them with a wastewater treatment plant? Because if the lakes have to receive wastewater, why can't we save a portion of our funding to build wastewater treatment plant and let the wastewater get into the wetland and into the lake? So design techniques, there is really no short of it. It's just the will to do it. So this is a very good example to see Houghton Park. You can always look at in detail about it. So I will skip this. I will also skip this part. So I bring a last example of front, which is harbor, which we are not discussing about it, but the important part to look here, that if you want to understand the relationship of water with the bigger water bodies, harbors are classic example to look at it. Every water body is interlinked. You can link a smallest pond to the ocean. If you can let the water flow from the smallest pond to the ocean with, of course, your preference of having fronts and ecosystem, wetlands and whatnot, and parks and forests, you can still deal with water bodies and also deal with water problems in the country. Another example of same port, this is an aspect where I want to bring a point where we are really making waterfronts without having a strong purpose to do waterfront. The Cape Town example I brought was they had a reason to do redevelopment of waterfront because they wanted to show that they are redeveloping after apartheid. So there was this symbolic, historic, futuristic reason to reclaim the water body reclaim the harbor, which was in a dilapidated condition, and build. And mind you, in the entire port area, you see the reflexes of history of apartheid time and the modern architecture as well. So it's a very good blend of old and new architecture there. So what I do, often people ask, and the group had also asked me, I say that many are mismanaging the water bodies and I'm just managing their knowledge. So I'm actually learning from all of you who are practicing. So I'm going to stop here and take your questions and then show a few more slides which are there. And I think I have the questions here for from you. So yes, so I have actually written few things here that I am against development for sure, waterfront development I mean, of the sort that divides human from nature, that divides, that dares to think economic and bi-ecology, that dumps common sense, science and conscience. But just that I don't believe in development does not mean that I don't believe in growth. So I'm going to take your questions from here. And I see that I have questions already thrown to me, right, Krishna? Yeah.
Yeah, we have some questions already from a few people who had.
You please read it for me. Yeah, because I did try to club the questions and try to answer some of them.
Sure. Virendra, do you
Yeah.
want to read them or should I?
Ishan is.
I have sorted out the questions. Basically, we were sort of looking at these waterfronts from majorly three point of views. We were first covering the notion of a waterfront. So we were talking about how a waterfront isn't only a specific designed idea that we have in mind, but it is much wider than that. And then we came to politics and policies. And then the third thing is design. So what I will do is try to take maybe one or two questions in all these three categories so we can run through them.
I have the questions also with me. I read through them, but you may please club them and ask me.
Sure. So in basically when it comes to the notion, I mean, we got rather than questions, they're more like comments. So I'll just read them out for everyone. So there's someone who's saying that water is dynamic in nature. So how can we as designers respond to water in a dynamic manner so as not to create hard built edges that are not environmentally friendly? In the past few decades, waterfronts have become public spaces or spaces for skyscrapers. The concern for making spaces for all and at the same time the capitalist approach of space division for privatized companies creates an imbalance. What are your thoughts on this?
I think I'm echoing what you are saying. I really don't have to add anything because that's what I have been saying in my talk so far. So you need to ask, because when we learn in schools, we are learning completely different. And when we get into practice, it changes completely. What we need to understand is that what makes it change. Is it only money? My understanding for so many years that it is not. There is something more. It's not the fee. It's not the requirement of the project. And that's where I was saying in that towards the end, we really have to find a purpose of doing waterfronts, which is not there. And economic purpose should not be the, the leading purpose. There has to be more than that. If they say it is for the well-being, then the indicators will be different. Yes. So I agree with you.
So most of these were more like comments and just following up from what you have been talking throughout your presentation. Coming to talking more from the point of view of the politics and the relationship between stakeholders, there's a question which says, how does design and construction of a waterfront affect the relationship of the locals living at the edge and the water? Does it alter the historical significance and relevance of that water body?
Of course, it will alter. It is just like, even if it is if a road is being built in front of your house, or if a wall is being built in front of your house, if a beautiful tree is being planted in front of you, it's as simple as that. But the moment when you talk about having doing something on a feature like water body, the meaning will change a lot. Having a water body in front of your house or your society, and the water is behaving well, until then you like it. If it is not behaving well, you don't like it. For example, flowing river, mosquitoes coming. So in the entire riverfront project has a momentum for the very reason that we faced back to the river, which has been now opened as a front to the river. I think that's the biggest contribution of the riverfront, that were we facing back. If there are more people of architecture fraternity today at this talk, we can even talk about, when we look at Le Corbusier's building, you see the building has both sides front. It is the only building which was facing the water body and trying to respect the presence of water body. And you look at all the buildings done in front of, in that stretch, everyone was facing back. So what this riverfront is going to do is bring a new front to the water body. Of course, there are economic angles to it. So it is definitely changing the relationship. Now imagine those who are facing back. Of course, their properties are also getting increased. The value is also getting increased. And I think many of the building blocks are also going through redevelopment process now. And they are going to now face the road, which is there on the riverfront side, if we are talking about that. But in my MPhil thesis, I did a quantitative research and literally calculated what is the benefit when our lake gets developed or not get developed. So taking Vastrapur, and I carried out survey to find out what is the change in the house price. And I'm sure you all know this commonsensical thing, but being researchers, we try to prove it. The house prices increased even more than 10 times, 25 times in some cases. So definitely the real estate price changes, and which is a narrative which common people, citizen appreciate in waterfronts, mind you. Common citizens will see quick benefit from anything. They need benefit yesterday. Than their future generation getting benefit. So if you talk to somebody that you don't cut this tree because it is going to give you oxygen for 50 years, we have to talk oxygen these days because of Corona, people will not be convinced. You know?
Yes.
Vis-a-vis saying that your land will get 10 times more expensive or pricey, it is very convincing factor. You know? So it will change your behavior in the economic sense. But if you are talking about having a cultural association with the water, you will really adapt to it if you see this economic change coming in your life. Trust me, as a citizen, we are always favoring these kind of quick developments which can earn you quick benefits vis-a-vis long-term ecological benefits. And this is where ecology loses the development race. So everybody is boarding that train, which is a development train, and that's why decision makers and designers get a societal support to go ahead of doing it. Unless and until the younger generation and people get a little bit voice talking about it, that no, we want this edge. The only thing is that we are misunderstanding is that at the edge being dirty with the solid waste thrown by the citizens of the India does not make the river dirty. Even a polluted water, let me tell you, wastewater specialist can come and tell you someday, a polluted water, we really don't like it, but the pollution in the water is only 0.3%, 99.7% is water. We forget to see that. We forget to talk about that narrative. So for only 0.3%, we are willing to, you know, demean a water which is 99.7% pure water which you are drinking. And mind you, many of the cities in the world are now drinking their own wastewater, recycling it, because it is, they have to just take out only that 0.3% and reclaim their water back. We have to also do it, by the way, in the country now, the way we are going. So if these riverfronts are happening and they are these engineering and ecosystem marvels, where the aesthetic of riverfront, which common citizens understand, that's the public realm and public space. Wonderful. So we have to look at this integrated approach, you know. So only doing the lipstick approach is not enough. If Sabarmati was taking a claim that I'm going to clear all the wastewater in my bed, like Kyoto is doing, wonderful, go ahead and do it. In fact, it has become now, we have to purify the water of the Sabarmati. It is not able to sustain by itself. That's a problem. We can decentralize wastewater treatment plants for all the lakes in the country so that we don't have to have such a huge problem of wastewater, and all the lakes will be better, because natural cleaning of water is much faster and long-term sustainable. And it is a very simple formula, not a rocket science. Are designers willing to do it? Can designers do it? My question is there, because in architecture and urban design and planning, we don't study water. That's my biggest concern. There is no 2 or 3 credit water course. There are always waterfront studios where everybody is designing beautiful places and spending 18 to 20 credits of talk, only talking about here I will cycle and here I will sit and here I will have gazebo and here there will be boating. But not talking about the water, not talking about the fish, not talking about how many species of birds my waterfront will bring. If you start with this program of the project, your project will be different.
True.
Yeah.
Vedanti had a question on going back to the notion of a waterfront. She wanted to ask a question on that. So Vedanti, you can
Yeah. Yes. So Mansi, I wanted to ask. You mentioned you were mentioning the interface between the sea and a waterfront, like when you're taking the not a lakefront but a seafront. So how do you start investigating, not from a very populistic point of view of just having a port, but also how do you start looking at ways to maybe if it's a seafront, then you have bunding, or like how do you start investigating that edge when it comes to a seafront?
I think very good question now, and we do have coastal regulation zone. First thing first, we have all the laws in place if we were talking about our country. But if we are talking about seafront as such, you have to first understand the nature of the sea, understand the movement or even of the moon, by the way, and understand the movement of the tides, understand the nature of the water quality, understand the marine ecosystem. The entire Mundra port, for example, was made without even doing EIA of the marine ecosystem. There was a big noise when in the UAE section, all these water fronts were getting made. So if you are actually talking about a waterfront development in the seafront, we can take example of Gateway of India that in those days, you have to really also see the land profile, because that will also make a difference. If you look at Porbandar, which has a rough water, Veraval, which has a rough water, Dwarka, which has a silent water. I'm just giving examples here to tell you that every portion of the coast will also have a different nature of water, not only by the quality of water, but also because of the land profile. So you need to first do physiographic. I mean, it's not only seawater. For any waterfront, you will have really good set of physiographic analysis. So I don't know which waterfront you are talking about, but this girl who spoke in this session today and through my video did an underwater institute in the coast of Goa. And she did study all the requirements which you need to work on the water, the density of the water, what kind of edge it can take, what kind of material it can take on the edge, what kind of retention you require, how far you have to leave the leverage of the water to go up. And then I don't want to complicate it with the climate change water issue, but indeed you have to now, and CRZ is very well written document, trust me. We have to follow the CRZ regulations, but it is also getting tempered. The Hanu classic case, where environmentalists are fighting it out to just maintain the CRZ. If you are really truly interested to do waterfront on coast, you just make mangroves. Why do we have to build all the time? Make a mangrove. We may not be interested. The problem is that in design, we consider construction to be design. Sea must have a mangrove at its front. That's the thumb rule. It's not a panacea. It is the best thing to ensure that the water in the mainland is good, to ensure that you are able to save as much as sweet water in the mainland, surface water, to ensure that the sea water is not mixing with the surface water of the mainland, to ensure that you don't receive the rising water from the tides as well as other things, hampering the development of the seafront. So CRZ has all these provisions. Architecture we also have to learn to read and learn. We have beautifully written environmental policies. It is a different story that we learn to misinterpret and manipulate, where we have to also be a little bit more honest on that. So if you see the East Coast, we have too many mangroves, right from Orissa, and you go up to Sundarban, which is also now reducing. But I will always vouch for mangroves. But if the land is already getting reclaimed, the intention is already clear that it is not meant for mangrove. Why would somebody buy a land and make a mangrove? That's my, that will be my question. And why would a designer design a mangrove? That is another question. But if I was given a choice, I will really encourage younger generation to go and design mangrove. And then design a building. There are buildings designed on water bodies. If you are so obsessed with designing buildings, it is possible. Don't block the water. That's the thumb line.
Maybe we can take this same discussion forward and maybe discuss a few examples, Indian
Sure.
examples, which could be good examples of waterfront design. You know, for example, if we can take the Carter Road Promenade or the Marine Drive, can we try and dissect that to understand how those examples have addressed context, and are those decisions? What kind of decisions are they? Are they wise decisions, or are there some decisions which were not very great?
If you take a particular example, you need a little bit more detailed, dissection, of course. But when you look at this Marine Drive and Carter Road, of course, they also went through the entire physiographic analysis. And by the way, that part is a rough water. So we need to first start with that it's a rough water. Rough water means that the nature of retention will be very different than it's a soft water. So if it is in that rough zone of water, you already start talking about safeguarding the edge with much harder or much built edge. Many of these, for example, apart from Carter Road, you can take example from all these high walls, like in Diu. I'm just recalling. In Goa, you have fort. So they were built in such a landscape where it had a very harsh water. Same in Marine Drive, I will say it is a harsh edge. In the Carter Road, it is a harsh edge. It has to be dealt in that manner to some extent. But why to divide humans and nature? And are there options, or were there rooms where humans could interact? If people have gone to, I'm not recalling the name of the place in Mumbai, after Hill Road, you reach out and the Taj is there, and this Shah Rukh Khan and all these people.
Bandra Fort?
Bandstand. You see, they have made an edge because it's a harsh water. But then people are jumping that edge and going and sitting on those stones.
Yeah.
There will be always tendency for people to reach out to water. Why would designers like to take that away from people? In fact, designers have to enhance that desire of the people. Our job is to ensure that the people are safe when they are doing it. That's our task. Our task is not to change the behavior of the people. Unfortunately, as designers, we think that we have the responsibility to ensure the way people should behave. We know what is a better way to behave. Instead of knowing that people want to behave in certain manner, or people have this behavior, how can I intervene as a designer and make it more safer and more enjoyable for the person? Why do people have to jump those walls and then get beaten up by the police and then sit in the water, which is on those big rocks and cement blocks, and then get beaten up? Why would you like to do that as designers? It's a limitation of design, I will say. Even in Carter Road, if I have to go further to dissect, I can go ahead with these kind of things. We need to understand our role as designers much more. So I think for any design which is in public realm, it's not only about waterfront, any public realm for that matter, something which architects and designers must do, but they don't learn in 5 years and 2 years of urban design, if they learn planning, if they go for planning specialization. So I'm bringing back education again and again because I teach in these disciplines and I find these gaps. If we can learn social engineering, if we can learn to survey, if we can learn to do participatory approach, if we can learn to bring out people's perception, you know, we will be better designers. And you all can relate that when you have done rural lab, when you have done these field studies where you had to interact with local community, they are so eye-opening. It's a different issue whether you can address all their aspirations or not, but intent is important. If the intent is to overpower people's desire and people's way of life or people's behavior, there is a problem and it is never lasting. If we can enhance their behavior and, you know, make them feel better about that they can live this way, and certainly if you want to change their behavior, for example, waste, we have to change the behavior. There are ways to do that. Yes.
Yes. True. There's a question from Anupriya.
Yeah, I have put all the questions, by the way, on the screen from the participants, which Krishna had sent me. So I have read them.
Yeah, sorry, this question, I couldn't, I wasn't able to kind of like post this question with something very organically.
I don't hear you, okay, clearly.
Can you hear me?
I could hear the can you hear me, not before that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I couldn't get a chance to kind of put down that question because it's just something that I thought of right now. So there is just two parts to it. One, just to clear, I'm not a designer or an architect, but I'm actually from Cochin, Kerala. So the first time I'm hearing the waterfront was basically in these brand advertisement agencies where they used to kind of put out waterfront apartments or villas near backwaters and such. So the very recent, after the Kerala floods, one of the biggest hoarding that came out near the airport was that flood-proof waterfront development apartments near the estuary. So there are these kind of situations, I think, like, you know, people try to innovate and the market demands that sometimes designers are also forced into taking these design choices as such. But what I'm also trying to connect here is that with these aspirations on one side, there are also these moves towards, you know, the inquiry around waterfront, and just rightly said, mangroves as such being, and towards the south also, there is this lush of mangroves as well. One of the recent amendments, and I think one of the members here also mentioned, yeah, I agree, not only in Andaman, but also in Lakshadweep, there are also these proposals. And these proposals are coming from Niti Aayog's report of creating floating villas and such, which is again kind of been very neglecting towards the coral reefs ecosystem and everything of that marine ecology. So, and also the sensitivity of the cultural sensitivity and everything around that. So my question is somewhere putting in such a way that, you know, how much control do designers actually have when it comes to these waterfront developments, and also in terms of something that's having a very strong socio-ecological, you know, threat as such. And when at the same time there is a strong push towards these projects, how does a designer then kind of like, you know, there is a cost to not do that ethically, and also where, you know, if it is not him or her, somebody else will be in that position to do that. So then doesn't it become a dilemma? Yeah, just putting it out there as a thought.
You put a question which every day, every young designer and old designers are thinking and talking to each other. If I don't do, somebody else will do, and let me then do it. Yeah, so that's one part of it. I just got your last part, and then I'm going to. Yes, the backwaters have been actually suffering from so-called development. And you rightly said that if there are these disasters or distresses, then designers are also pushed towards finding new ways to do it. But then when we have been for long appreciating the waterfront development, you know, everybody wants a waterfront. But when we talked about waterfront in the past, it was always about a waterfront which was flowing most of the time, which was appreciated. Because flowing waters will have lesser problems, lesser pollution, lesser so-called mosquitoes and all those. So all these Kerala backwaters are flowing waters. That makes a huge difference in than the water which we talk about here in Gujarat and so on. So if when you say what can designers do when these decisions are taken and whether designers do have a say, I do agree with you that many times designers don't have a say, but can designers also not have their voice now in the decision making? This is one profession which has not been held accountable at all in all the things which happens in the city. People just talk about politicians doing wrong decisions. Why not designers? I'm not willing to accept the fact that designers cannot have much say in the way cities are designed. Why do we need to submit to political decisions? Why can't we come together and say that this is what we require for the city? I tell you why. Because we are constantly in the mode of competing. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't want to do a spiritual talk here, but unfortunately, our profession is the most disjointed way we work together. And that's why I was so highly appreciative of this FNC, that 8 people could sit together and under one roof and talk about something, which is not easy in design. I'm doing my own research on women in architecture. I'm trying to figure out how women find their way in this profession. I learned that most of the big men have their background back of the house, back of the office support, and all these things taken care by women, but they are not leading. And many of the places where partners work together, they have different viewpoints. Different viewpoints is fine, but then why are we not able to come together and say what is good for our city? How many times we do that? You just go to see all these meetings which happen in architecture and urban design associations. Are they talking about doing good for the city? How many campaigns architects have run in the country? Urban designers have run in the. We are completely shying away from our societal responsibilities. Unfortunately, I have heard from through my own ears in our education, where we have a kind of a, unsaid understanding that we are getting educated to serve the rich people or the politically powerful people. Jo wo bolenge, we have to do it. I know you are from Cochin, so I should not be speaking in Hindi. So it is kind of, we are already prejudiced. We are already prejudiced that we cannot bring a change. And the only change we can bring is through our designs. I do not agree to that. We are not doing enough activism that is required from the profession. We do not teach architectural journalism. We do not do architectural appraisal. We do not do architectural criticism. Appraisal तो फिर भी हो जाता है. वाह वाह करने में तो सब लोग आ जाते हैं, सबकी building or projects. How many times people are writing criticism? Criticism is very important part of evolution, even in design. What are we doing in studio defense? What are we doing in studio juries? Isn't it a constructive criticism? Somehow in our practice, we are not doing it because everybody wants to be nice to each other. But then all nice people do not make nice output, let me tell you that. And our cities are classic example of it. I have really grown past that architectural mode in my head because of my multidisciplinary education. But ironically, our profession needs to be more together to think about doing better things. And by the way, Kerala is still better than other places in those terms. You can call it by politics, by culture, by society, by education. Still, it can do better, I think. But in a relative term, it is still better. Kerala is hosting most of the mangroves of the country, apart from Odisha and Bengal and other parts. So I will still give some points to those places. But see, the more we follow models, we call it panacea in political science and governance, the more risky it becomes. We really need to look at every project fresh and not take any model or successful project as our learning. I'm completely against it. If you do that, please look at that project also from the critical part of it. how many times our successful projects are evaluated, and how many times designers are writing for themselves, even for their own evolution and for the society's evolution. Look, I did this project, the society appreciated it, but I learned that these were the mistakes in the project. Please, younger designers, when you do not repeat the mistake which is conducted, which is carried out by me in absentia, or by not understanding the context, or by not realizing the impact of it. We are not self-reflecting profession. We are not doing it. If all the big masters start doing it, all of us will be better designers tomorrow. Nobody wants to talk about how I failed. Everybody wants to talk about how you succeeded. So when we take Panacea, why I'm giving you this story, and I'm a very straightforward talking person, when you take success stories, take it with a pinch of salt. And classic example is Sydney Opera House. So much of gaga and praise. Do we talk about that it did not serve the purpose for which it was built? No. We don't talk about it. We just look at the form and go overwhelmed about it. Same is happening with all the waterfronts developments. If we have a good and genuine evaluation of all the waterfronts which are being modeled, because we are replicating, so remember, we are multiplying the problems and the mistakes. If we can have a genuine evaluation that these are do's, you can adapt. These are don'ts. You have to reassess your context and take a decision wisely than copying this formula. I think we are doing more, we are more honest to the profession and so honest to the society. If you find the environmental impact assessment of Sabarmati riverfront, if you find the strategic environmental assessment of Sabarmati riverfront, please share it with me so that we can learn and we don't repeat the mistakes. And we, of course, take the good things from it and take it in the next project. We are not doing it, unfortunately.
Thank you. I think we'll take two last questions now
Sure.
because we're running out of time.
Yes.
I think Monique wanted to ask the question. I think if Monique also, I'd request everyone to keep it a little concise so that we can finish sooner.
Yeah. Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
Ma'am, I just wanted to get an opinion on a project like the coastal road development that's happening in Mumbai, which is harmful for the marine biodiversity. But eventually, there are certain reasons like it might reduce the traffic of not one person, but probably 10-15 lakh people who are traveling daily on that route. So it might eventually impact not only the economy, but also the mental stress aspect of the people who daily travel in like 2 to 3 hours of traffic. So how do you judge such a project, or not judge actually, but how do you look at such a project?
I will not judge such a project because I tell you why. If the decision is already being taken and you are not standing for it, we can just talk on this platform. If you have like-minded people, will you not be, see, it's just repeating the previous, will you not be willing to take up the situation and really discuss it with the designers, with the decision makers? And another thing I think we have to do, if we want to talk about something where we think that something is not happening right, we have to provide an alternate, And that's why I'm bringing my last 3 slides here to show Sabarmati again, because that was a talk. So I think this road, that road, this front, sorry.
This is a dilemma between necessity and. So I don't think there is anything good or right or wrong about this. So how do you actually point as to what is right and what is wrong?
It is very subjective, but there are certain things which are right is right when we talk about ecology. There is nothing wrong if your project is not talking about ecology driven, there is something already fishy. So I have no doubts about what is right in ecology. But if your narrative itself is not including ecology, if it is an economy-driven project, even for lip service, show the ecology part of it. That may be a transition or a change in the way we look at design. So I'm just going to play it because it is about narrative, how we take it. I had invited actually, sorry. Oh, the slide is stuck. I had actually had my what I do, but I don't want to share that. I want to take you through the Sabarmati. Original Sabarmati, Vienna model, Bernard Kahn's conceptualization, and new Sabarmati development. It is just a change of narrative, what we want. I want to just bring your notice to a very little thing, very trivial thing in the detail of it. You see on the left picture, the seats are on the edge of the water. People have to face the building side, facing back to the water again. It's a very little design element. Another thing I want you to observe. The trees are here, the seats are there. And Ahmedabad has 47 degrees, 45 degrees of temperature, and this is all concrete. We talked about larger issues, but God lies in details. The way you do the smallest thing, unfortunately, when it gets manifold and multiplied in the larger scale, the disaster is bigger. Do you see that? I'm talking about a very simple design detail. The location of the seat with respect to water. It is a waterfront, mind you, to watch water. The location of the trees, where we have to get some shade in a summer of Ahmedabad. This is where we need to change as designers. Then, of course, there is water issue, of course. I'm just going to stop it here. So I think if you want to talk about it is about, again, bringing together, having design alternatives and talking it in a constructive way. So architectural criticism can be also constructive. We do not have water activism in architecture planning. It is also possible to do that. Are people doing it? Is our profession interested to do it? Why do we want to all develop something? This is a question which I ask, and I have a lecture on redevelopment. Why do we want to develop when we know our country is actually leading in the world with vacancy rate, which means we have more buildings than we require to house people, all kinds of things, you know, all kinds of housing people, not housing as such housing, but for office, for institution, for commercial. We are leading in the world with excess building. Why do we want to develop? Same applies with why are we so obsessed with concrete? Why ecological development is not a development? If you have a project grant of 100 crore rupees, why not build it for 20 crore rupees and keep that money for next 20 years of development? Because another thing which happens in the so-called hardscape development, which we like and appreciate, is that the maintenance and taking care becomes very easy for local authorities. Wilderness requires care, more care than the least we can do to wilderness is just leave to wilderness. But we are not willing to do it. As humans, we want to tame every square inch of the land. So my final line for it is, if we have 92% of land area for ourselves, for humans to inhabit, can we not leave 9% area for the water, for the trees, for the birds, for other things and not go there? Why we want to have a walkway and a runway and something on that lakefront or a riverfront? This is extreme end I'm talking about. I'm not even then talking about development per se. I'm talking about how big is our heart to leave certain portion of the area for the other inhabitants of the country, for the other inhabitants of the world. Designs have not gone to that end. We leave that responsibility to ecologists and environmentalists. For designers, we have to have pen, we have to have line, we have to have concrete, we have to have wood, we have to have cement and steel. I think designers have to redefine their role, especially your generation. Because if we are having no water, safe water, if we are having no fresh air, you can't be doing development all the time. Delhi's 35% air pollution reason is building industry. Is the architecture and urban design fraternity talking about it? Any cities, air pollution 35% is constituted by building industry. Do we talk about it? We just remain silent, or probably we don't know. So I have serious issues on these things. The more I get inclined to ecology, to be honest. So you have to take a radical decision as this generation now, because you may have problems. I'm having a project right now where all the waterfronts have been built, and now I am invited to look at how to get water in those waterfronts and those water bodies. How ironic that can be.
As designers and researchers, I think it gives us a lot to think about, and how we need to be so sensitive about our natural resources and think about them first before actually designing.
Actually, you don't design. That is the best contribution you can do to the society. And I have said it in many platforms. And I don't know why people want to hear this, but I just say it from my heart here. If you stop designing now, you are doing the biggest contribution to the urbanization now. Please do some ecological development, ecological design, work for nature, work for birds, for water, for trees. This is also development, and there is money. We just don't realize it. We feel that making a building is going to bring money, and pouring concrete is going to bring money, and the money is going to grow. No. We have to own that responsibility to think that way, but it has to come from the school. Schools are not willing to do it. As I mentioned, I was sitting in a board of studies today in one of the 500 plus schools in the country. And for 3 years, I have been telling, give me 2 credits of water education. This year also, I did not succeed. So I had to make that remark. So I have to wait for next year's board of studies meeting and see if you can integrate 2 credits of course. In a 5 years, 50 courses you study, you don't have space for 2 credits of water. And we are talking about waterfront development. That itself tells that we cannot think about water the way we should be thinking. So we all want to do good to water, but we need education. Another problem in architecture is that we think that we will learn by doing. And this is something very ironic in architecture profession, that they demean the importance of research, many of them, those who are practicing, because they think that, they are just writing and reading and not doing any development. If you want to learn by doing, mind you, your personal aspiration of learning by doing is costing heavy to the society. If you learn and do, I think you do less damage to the society. Don't learn by doing. Please learn first and then do.
That's very true.
So I'm just an academician, so I can really talk in this way. I'm seeing students every day, every night, every morning, sorry.
Yeah. I think we won't be able to take the questions further.
Sure.
But what we can do is, in some other way, if we can get those questions through an email or something, then we'll try to achieve that. For the meanwhile, I think we will try and wrap up the session.
Sure.
Vedanti, do you want to?
Thanks, Kishan. Thank you, Mansi, for being a part of the FNC. It was really stimulating to have you here and think about so many aspects. I think thanks to everyone else also who was able to join us and stay through this long session.
Yeah.
I think, like Kishan said, if there are a few unaddressed questions which you guys can just email us, and we'll probably link it to a thread with Mansi on email and hopefully get answers to them as well. Yes, thank you so much, and it was insightful to everyone.
Yeah. Thank you all. And I'm sorry if I have not managed to satisfy your questions or answers you were expecting, which often happens in my case. But thank you for coming and listening. I think it's very important to learn this art of listening. Thank you all, and thank you, FNC.
Thank you so much, Mansi ma'am, and it was a very, very interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you. So I can leave now, I guess.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.